Warning: Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers should use caution when viewing this book, as it may contain images and names of deceased persons. Unfinished Business, a photographic exhibition featuring stories from Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities.
I would like to show my respect to the traditional custodians of the land on which this project was conceived and realised, and acknowledge their elders past and present. The Unfinished Business project would not exist without the guidance and cultural knowledge of the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have contributed to it. Unfinished Business reveals the stories of 30 people with disabilities from Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Through their involvement in the project, each participant draws much needed attention to the critical issues that impact on their lives. Each participant's story is complex and intertwined with Australia's political and social history, which has resulted in today's unacceptably high rates of disability in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. The exhibition was launched in September 2013 at the Palais des Nations in Geneva by Mr. Tokayev, the then Director of the United Nations Office in Geneva, and Peter Woolcott, Australia's Ambassador to the United Nations. The work was displayed to coincide with the 24th session of the Committee of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD, a body within the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The project was supported by the First Peoples Disability Network and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade through the Australian Mission in Geneva. In December 2013, the exhibition was displayed at the World Health Organization headquarters in Geneva. The exhibition will be shown at the United Nations 2014 World Conference on Indigenous People in New York. The narrators are predominantly high-profile Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have given their support to the participants and the concerns that they have expressed. All the narrators have contributed in their own right to improving the human rights and lives of all Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The exhibition consists of 30 3D lenticular backlit photographic portraits of the participants, plus a narrative-style video interview of each participant. The interviews were made by Dieter and Liam Neeram. This project also has an app which will enable people with sensory, cognitive and learning impairments to engage with the project. You cannot argue when someone says "I feel." It's not our right. It's part of our own journey to learn empathy rather than compassion. Our own reaction exposes us to ourselves and reminds us that we all need the ability to listen when someone lays their naked soul in our path.
And that was Belinda Mason speaking, the photographer of Unfinished Business. The foreword of this book is by Damien Griffiths, the Chief Executive Officer of the First Peoples Disability Network Australia.
By any measure, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disability are amongst some of the most disadvantaged Australians. They often face multiple barriers to their meaningful participation within their own communities and the wider community. Addressing the unmet needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disability is one of the most critical social justice issues in Australia today. Unfinished Business powerfully exposes the injustices experienced by many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities. It also importantly shows us the power and dignity inherent within the participants. Each photograph also reminds us of the diversity of disability in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. The First Peoples Disability Network, the national organisation representing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities and their families, is deeply proud of our association with this historic and groundbreaking exhibition. For too long, the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities have been largely overlooked. This is despite the fact that the prevalence of disability amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders is significantly higher than that of the general Australian population. Until recently, the prevalence of disability in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities has been only anecdotally reported. However, the 2011 Australian census concluded that at least 50% of Aboriginal people have some form of disability or long-term health condition. This may actually be a conservative figure because it does not include the measure of the prevalence of psychosocial disability in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. The high prevalence of disability, approximately twice that of the non-Indigenous population, occurs in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities for a range of social reasons, including poor health care, poor nutrition, exposure to violence, and psychological trauma, for example, arising from removal from family and community, and substance abuse, as well as the breakdown of traditional community structures in some areas. Aboriginal people with disability are significantly overrepresented on a population group basis among homeless people in the criminal and juvenile justice systems and in the care and protection system, both as parents and children. Currently, most Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities remain at the periphery of the disability service system. This continues to occur for a range of reasons, some of which are well established. However, one factor that remains little understood is the reluctance of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities to identify as people with disability. This continues to occur for a range of reasons. These include the fact that in traditional language there isn't a comparable word to disability. This would suggest that disability was an accepted part of the human experience. That is, that people are not labelled. Many parents are reluctant to identify their children with disability because they worry that they may be viewed as bad parents and as a consequence have their children removed. It is still the case today that Aboriginal children are significantly overrepresented in the out-of-home care system. Furthermore, some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities are reluctant to self-identify because they may already experience discrimination based upon their Aboriginality and they do not want to take on another perceived negative label. This preference to not identify presents a fundamental barrier to the equal participation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities in Australian society. The First Peoples Disability Network argues passionately that for positive change to happen in the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities, the change must be driven by a community itself. It cannot be imposed, implied, intervened, or developed with well-meaning intention from an external service system that the vast majority of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities have little or no experience of in the first place. Throughout many communities across the country, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders with disabilities have been supported and accepted as members of their communities. However, it is the resources to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders with disabilities that many communities lack. Furthermore, the service system tends to operate from a doing for as opposed to doing with approach, which only further disenfranchises communities because they simply do not feel that they can self-direct their future. It must be remembered that in many ways the social movement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities is starting from an absolute baseline position. Unfinished Business acts as a powerful conduit for the consolidation of the new emerging social movement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disabilities. Each of the participants in the exhibition are leaders in their own right. Unfinished Business provides a critical platform for the participants' stories to be heard. We are very proud to be associated with Unfinished Business. We are very grateful to photographer Belinda Mason and thank her not only for the quality of her work, but also for the respectful and dignified way she has portrayed each of the participants.
I would like to introduce you to the narrator of this book, Gail Kennedy. Gail Kennedy is a member of the Wangebon clan of the Nyampa, speaking nation of southwest New South Wales. She has had stories published in newspapers, magazines, and broadcast on radio, and was the Indigenous issues writer and researcher for Streetwise Comics from 1995 to 1998. She is in demand at literary events and workshops and has spoken in Australia and internationally on the issues of disability and culture. She has lived and worked in Sydney since 1973. Her book, Me, Ant-Man and Fleabag, won the 2006 David Unipon Award.
I am a polio survivor who lives with the late effects of polio, known as post-polio syndrome. I lived a very active and mobile life despite a limp and was initially shocked and dismayed when I, like my fellow polio survivors, found out that the mobility we had taken for granted was to be severely compromised to such an extent that from 2004 I found myself in a wheelchair full time. As post-polio syndrome progressed, I also found that I suffered from fatigue so debilitating I had to give up working full-time and go to part-time. It eventually progressed to the point where I had to give up work altogether. I went from someone who had never considered herself as having a disability to someone who clearly had, and with all the incumbent difficulties. Lack of access, lack of equity, frustration at dealing with bureaucrats that did not seem to listen or understand my needs, and finally, but most importantly, I seemed to become invisible. I joined the People with Disability tribe, the Shadow People. As a member of this group, I soon discovered that people without disabilities talked about, around, over, and to the people who accompany us, never to us. Our opinions are rarely sought, and when they are, will often be ignored. We are told what we need, when we will get it, if at all, and how the services we need will be delivered. For the first time in my life, I felt disempowered. Spontaneity was not an option anymore. Now everything had to be researched, planned. I could not, and still cannot, accept invitations anywhere without first finding out if they have access and facilities. And I'm still amazed at the lack of access and equity in this country. I became depressed and grieved deeply for my old freewheeling, spontaneous life. In spite of being constantly told that I had to buck up and get on with it, I allowed myself a time of grieving and eventually came up for air and rebuilt my life to what it is now, a rich and fulfilling one. When I started moving in circles where I met other people with disabilities, I found that on the whole, and in spite of the barriers that society puts before us, they also lead great lives full of love, romance, travel, work and family. We know and understand that our disabilities are part of us, but they don't define us. It is society that has to learn to understand that. One of the things that I and other people with disabilities are concerned about is how we are depicted across the whole of media spectrum. We are portrayed as noble victims, trotted out on television to the rising strains of Wind Beneath My Wings, achieving things meant only for non-disabled people. The message, though, is not one of achievement for its own sake, but rather as one that is a wake-up call to non-disabled people to stop whining and get on with it. If this poor so-and-so can achieve this, what gives you the right to carry on? Look at them and thank the powers that be that you are not in their situation. The media particularly loves a little mop-topped, smart-mouthed child with a disability to drive this message home. We people with disabilities call it inspirational porn. The thing I love about this book is that the subjects chose how they wanted to be portrayed. They provided their own text to accompany the photographs, approved all additional text, and chose the narrators for the audiobook. This is what gives it such quiet power. Not all the people in this book have a disability, but are advocates for those who do. Not all the people have visible disabilities. What these people all have in common is that they are all extraordinary, some for their achievements, some for sheer dogged persistence in the face of almost unbelievable obstacles, and others for the very act of survival against the odds. Their gifts and powers are all part of their DNA, part of the very fabric of their being, and they would achieve and survive in any circumstances because it is who they are. This book brings people with disabilities, advocates and carers out of the shadow. They are front and centre and in your face, right where they belong. Gail Rankin's portrait is called Narrandjeri Woman, and Gail says,
Our Indigenous people in Australia, we're 3% of the total Australian population, but of that 3%, the last statistics reveal that at least 50% of that population, of that 3%, is affected in some form of disability. So it's very high numbers for our people. I mean, you must remember that there is no word for disability in any Indigenous language. So a lot of our people have connected with agencies, one because of colonisation and the fact that you have the stolen generation. It's the fear of having that child removed from them and growing up institutionalised. But only because I'm passionate about it. I'm extremely passionate about it. But now I am here and fighting the fight, fighting the fear, fighting the racism. We face double discrimination, discrimination because of disability and because of our race. Racism is based from ignorance, I would say. But having a disability, you get a double whammy.
Gail Rankin is a Narrandjeri woman born in Ralcan on Lake Alexandrina in South Australia. In 1981 she played herself in the film Wrong Side of the Road, which was the first Australian feature film with an all-Indigenous cast. The screenplay, about two real-life Aboriginal bands called Usmob and No Fixed Address, was written in collaboration with the cast and captures a day-in-the-life look at the racism they encountered. No Fixed Address and Us Mob became the first contemporary Aboriginal bands to be recorded. Their song, called We Have Survived, has become an unofficial anthem for many of Australia's Indigenous peoples. The film still continues to be featured in national and international festivals. In her early 30s, Gail's leg was amputated as a result of cardiovascular disease. Gail is now the president of the First Peoples Disability Network, Australia's first national peak body for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with a disability. Through her role with First Peoples Disability Network, Gail is also involved with organisations such as the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations, Motivation International Australia, and the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples. She was a panellist at the 15th EU NGO Human Rights Forum on Accountability in Brussels and has been a regular speaker at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Gail is determined to address the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with a disability to bring about positive change and culturally appropriate service delivery.
Thank you to Robin. Robin Quiggin is a Wiradjuri woman and the CEO of the Australian Indigenous Governance Institute. Elder Yami Lester's portrait is called Maralinga, and Yami says,
in 1950s, there was a British government and Australian government made agreement to have a bomb testing in Australia. They're not far from here, and I was only a little kid. They were working there testing of bombs, and the first one that let it go was called Totem 1. We heard it here loud and clear and feel the ground shook. We seen radiation full out over our camp. It was moving very quietly and very deadly. After that I went blind on the right eye straight away, and on the left I had some sight left.
Yami Lester is a Yankunytjatjara man, an Aboriginal man from South Australia. In the 1950s, while he was a young boy, he became severely vision impaired by an ominous black mist that rolled in from the desert and engulfed his family's camp. After the mist passed, his family group became violently ill with vomiting, diarrhea, outbreaks of severe skin rashes, and vision loss. Some of them died. This black mist was fallout from British nuclear tests at Maralinga and Emu Junction. In the 1950s and 60s, the British government conducted nuclear tests at Maralinga in South Australia. A total of 7 major tests were carried out, as well as hundreds of smaller trials. These tests exposed both the servicemen stationed at Maralinga and the local Aboriginal inhabitants to hazardous levels of radiation. Contamination of the sites with radioactive materials is predicted to remain active for hundreds of thousands of years. Yami Lester's most significant contribution to the rights of Aboriginal people was in helping gain public recognition for the effects of the atomic test at Maralinga and an acknowledgement of the catastrophic ways Aboriginal people have been affected. Yami's actions helped lead to the McClelland Royal Commission in 1985 to examine the British nuclear tests in Australia and their effects. The Royal Commission ultimately found that there were still significant radiation hazards around many of the original test sites, and that rehabilitation of the area was necessary. Its recommendations included group compensation for the Maralinga Tjarutja people and an extensive long-term clean-up operation to restore the land. In 1993, the British government paid the Australian government £20 million toward the clean-up. In 1994, the Australian government paid the Maralinga Tjarutja Indigenous inhabitants of the Maralinga area a compensation settlement of $13.5 million. The land where the testing had taken place was returned to the Maralinga Tjarutja people in December 2009. Many still question whether the land is actually yet safe for human occupation.
Thank you to Peter Ford, the founder and CEO of Control Bionics and a great mate of Yami's. Roy Mundine OAM is a retired Warrant Officer Class 1 of the Australian Army. He is also a Vietnam War veteran, and his portrait is called The Soldier. Roy says,
and I went forward to check this place out. And when I was moving forward, I tripped a mine and it blew my leg off. If you're the leader of the push, if you go down, if things don't work properly, you will all go down. You will all end up dead. That's what you've got to do. Yeah. You're no good till I'm dead. You're no good till I'm dead. But, that's it. It's a fact of life. As I said, life's a death sentence, numerous reprieves, make the best of it.
On the 25th of April 1969, during Operation Surfside in Phuoc Toi Province, Corporal Mundine was leading section commander with 1 platoon, A Company. On approaching a suspected enemy area, Corporal Mundine deployed his section on the ground and moved forward alone to reconnoitre the enemy position. He sighted enemy bunkers and was about to signal further instructions when he detonated a mine that severed his lower right leg and caused severe wounds to his back and his other leg. Members of his section started to move forward to his assistance into what was later shown to be an enemy minefield. Corporal Mundine, although in considerable pain, ordered his section to stay out of the area and directed them to new fire positions after giving full details of the enemy bunker system. For over 40 minutes, he continued to give instructions to his section and refused to allow any members of the platoon to move near him until engineers had cleared path through the minefield. This occasion was typical of his outstanding leadership. He was mentioned in dispatches in 1969. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have served in virtually every conflict and peacekeeping mission from the Boer War to Afghanistan. In 1914, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders could not vote and were not counted in the census. But once in the Australian Imperial Forces, they were treated as equals. They were paid the same as other soldiers and generally accepted without prejudice. After the war, in areas such as education, employment and civil liberties, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, ex-servicemen and women found that discrimination remained. The repression of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders increased between the wars as Protection Acts gave government officials greater control over Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander political movements, including the Aborigines Leagues and the Aborigines Progressive Association, grew in the 1930s, paving the way for future change. Many servicemen who had returned now lie in unmarked graves as their families were too poor to afford proper burial. Today, the Australian government is assisting these families to right this wrong. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders continue to serve today in regular and reserve units. In Northern Australia, Regional Force surveillance units, drawn from local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, complement regular units. These are the eyes and ears of the Northern Land Forces.
Thank you to Gary Oakley, a Kamilaroi man who is the Indigenous Liaison Officer at the Australian War Memorial and the National President of the ATSI Veterans and Services Association of Australia. Quaden Georgetown Jr. is a young boy from the Birai and Gubba Nations, and his portrait is called The Activist. Quaden's mother, Yarraka Bales, says,
Yeah, I'm the mother of a 2-year-old boy with achondroplasia, which is the most common form of dwarfism. Not knowing anything about it was the scariest part. Nothing can ever prepare you for, the doctor saying there's something wrong with your child. So from that day on, our lives have never been the same. And now it's just joy. He's been born into the best family. And he has, No one looks at him differently. He's treated the same, he gets disciplined the same. It just makes me happy just thinking about him,
And this little man just lights up our lives. It'd be hard to imagine life without this boy. He's just beautiful. We've never seen a black small person in the First Nations community. He's an amazing little man. But I keep saying to him, you're going to grow bigger. You won't be as big as your dad or as big as Pop or your mum. But you will grow bigger and you will be able to drive a car, play soccer or football or ride a motorbike. You will be able to do those things. It's just that you're going to be a little bit shorter in the arms and legs. But it's interesting watching him grow up and thinking ahead about what might be in store for this boy. What's life going to bring him? Life's challenges, the discrimination, the taunts, the racism, all of that. But he's going to be well grounded in culture and identity, and that's where his strength is going to come from.
Thank you to Tiger Bales, Quayden's grandfather and chairman of the National Indigenous Radio Service. Carol Carter is a Kamilaroi woman and Bankstown elder. Her portrait is called Malpractice. Carol says,
when the elders in Bankstown were made aware of the basic card coming here, we wanted to know if there was going to be any consultation or if they were enforcing it without people's knowledge. You can't take people's rights away, and this is our rights and our self-worth, our integrity that people are knocking down. You can't be kicking people while they're down. They need to prop them up and listen to us and have that welfare. People do consultations for them to explain exactly what was going on in this area of the basic card, which it is the intervention. Doesn't matter what colour you paint it, it's still an intervention into people's lives. It's not on.
Auntie Carol Carter acquired Guillain-Barré syndrome as a result of malpractice by her local doctor who failed to check her medical records and prescribe medication she is allergic to. Within 48 hours, she was hospitalised. Her body's immune system attacked part of the peripheral nervous system, leaving her paralysed. Carol was unable to access services that would have provided her with compensation, and by the time she was able, that opportunity had passed. With the thought of living in a nursing home environment, her self-determination enabled her to finally live independently. This determination extends into her local community in Bankstown as she campaigns to improve greater consultation processes.
The Basics card was introduced as part of the Northern Territory intervention or Northern Territory emergency response in 2007. This policy was a massive assault on the human rights of Aboriginal people and has been condemned by the UN Special Rapporteur on Indigenous rights for its overt discrimination. The Racial Discrimination Act was suspended to allow for wide-ranging controls over the lives and land of Aboriginal people. The Basics card is one of these control measures. It restricts what Aboriginal people can buy with social security payments, only allowing access to approved items such as food and clothing at government-approved stores. For many elders, this has been a traumatic return to the days when Aboriginal lives were ruled by government protectors, and rations were distributed instead of cash. In 2012, the Basics card began to be expanded into other disadvantaged communities across Australia, including Bankstown in Sydney.
Thank you to Rosalie Kunoth Monks, who is a human rights activist and elder of Utopia Homelands. Eve Kitchener is a Wiradjuri woman and artist. Her image is called Stolen, and Eve says,
They said they had this place up at Hay. It was a Japanese prison, and they turned it into an institution for young girls. And you weren't allowed to talk, eyes on the ground. I got raped there, and I was only a girl, and I hate the feeling of when you know that when you try to trust somebody fully and You don't know when that's been broken, and you don't know if it can ever be put back together again. They tried to break me down, but I'll tell you something, they never broke my spirit. I wouldn't let them break my spirit. I said, you can bash the hell out of me, you can do whatever you want. I said, but you're not going to break me down.
In 1961, at the age of 5, Eve was stolen from a family where they lived on the Lane Cove River in Sydney. Her institutionalisation included continual sexual abuse and no preparation for the world beyond. At 18, she was legally an adult and removed from what she knew as home. She was left in King's Cross in Sydney, uneducated and with no money. Not by choice, Eve became a sex worker and was drawn into the dark underbelly of human trafficking. Eve was continually raped and gave birth to a daughter that she gave up. With this loss, she self-medicated and became a heroin addict. Eve found that her brother had suffered a similar fate and also struggles with mental health issues. When Eve found her little sister, she discovered that she had been adopted into a white family who treated her well, and this created a void between them. Due to Eve's experiences, some of her fears and illnesses have been passed on to her children. The daughter Eve gave up for adoption has never been able to reconcile with her. After a friend was murdered, she escaped 2,000 kilometres north and found the sanctuary of a loving partner and more children. They have been married 27 years. Unfortunately, the emotional scars of her past have never enabled her to kiss him.
Thank you to singer-songwriter Archie Roach, who was a Bundjalung and Gunditj Mara man. Gary Umbagai is a Danbiganari Assistant Ranger Coordinator. His portrait is called The Hanging Tree, and Gary says,
I'm from Mowanjum near Derby, WA, up in the far north, Kimberley. We have a big problem of alcohol in the community, and there's a lot of mental problems. Every suicide that we had, they see the ambulance come around and the policeman, they got a person hanging from the tree, and them kids, 8 or 9 years old, see this, and they think it's normal. If I had a magic wand, I would make everything right in our community, educate our kids about their culture, about their health. We need to get our people back out to our country. That's if I had a magic wand.
Gary Umbagai was given the name Willinji. He is an Aboriginal man from the Warara tribe. He lives in Mowanjum, a community just outside Derby in Western Australia. Mowanjum is a word taken from the Ngaringman language. It means settled at last. The community is made up of 300 people, and the majority of them belong to one of 3 language groups, Warara, Wanambal and Ngaringman. Gary feels that suicide has been normalised in his community. He said that suicide was unknown in traditional Aboriginal culture and there is no word in language for this. When someone suicides, they cut down the tree from which they hang themselves. People believe this must be done for spiritual reasons and to help the healing process. Gary's brother Radigi committed suicide in Mowanjum in 2007. Gary is pictured at the base of a hanging tree that has yet to be cut down. In more recent years in the Kimberley, there have been 25 suicides, 21 in and around Derby and Mowanjum during a 12-month period. This was more than the Australian Defence Force fatalities in Afghanistan during the same period. Mowanjum and Derby are typical of many remote communities where many children are not in school. What they see around them is despair, joblessness and aimlessness among their young adults. This gives youth little incentive to believe in the value of a school education. What they see depicted on television about the affluent communities and cities around Australia is not what they see in their own communities. In 2012, a Northern Territory Select Committee on Youth Suicide tabled its report into youth suicide and found the obvious. that there are significantly higher rates of Aboriginal suicides when compared to the national average. The report highlighted the underlying causes to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander youth suicide as mental illness, substance abuses, sexual abuse, and trauma, but failed to highlight acute poverty and a suite of rights denied to this day to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in many of these troubled communities. What is missing in many of these communities are the pathways and access to opportunities and to the benefits of education and hard work, which the rest of Australia does have access to. These communities continue to be neglected by state and federal government jurisdictions and their agencies. Effective services and continued community support for social and community infrastructure have not been provided or continued in these communities. Instead, they are dilapidated third world environments.
Thank you to Kidji woman Joseph Farah, who is MP for Kimberley, WA. Gayangwa Lalara is a Warrnindil woman and Vice Chairperson of the MJD Foundation. Her portrait is called The MJD. Gayangwa says,
I live at Narugu, Rhode Island, and this is my story. Talk about the MJD. From my two sisters and down to my younger brother, they've got this MJD. And I was the luckiest one that didn't have the MJD. But with my brothers, I never sat next to them and never talked to them about this disease. I only said to them, I wish that I could help you, feed you, but our culture says that now because I'm not allowed to sit next to my brother or even feed him. It's our culture. Only I used to go and grab something for them and gave them someone else that I asked to help them. We used to help each other. We did our best and treated them as a normal person. We never treated them as MJD Clyde, no.
My families are from Rhode Island in the Northern Territory. There is a sickness in our family. It's called Macarthur-Joseph's disease. It is a bad sickness that makes our body stop working properly. And we pass it down to our children. It's starting to come to the children earlier than the parents took. It takes away our talking and our walking and everything very hard. We need help to do everything, every little thing, but it's not hurt our thinking. We can still think very well. It makes us sad, but our family stays strong to help each other.
Melinda Lalara is Gayangwa's niece. She also has MJD.
Macarthur-Joseph disease, a long-term and progressive neurodegenerative condition. Macarthur-Joseph disease is an inherited autosomal dominant disorder, which means that each child of a person who has the defective gene has a 50% chance of inheriting the disease. In addition, the mutation is typically expanded when it is passed to the next generation. This is known as anticipation, and it means that their disease onset is approximately 8 to 10 years earlier than their parents. Progression of the disease is accelerated and symptoms are more severe.
Thank you to Libby Massey, who is the Director of Research and Community Services for the MJD Foundation. Jake Briggs is a Wonnarua and Kamilaroi man who is the Chairperson of the Aboriginal Disability Network New South Wales. His portrait is called Soul Deep, and Jake says,
being a quadriplegic, when I had my accident, jumped into a pool and skimmed the bottom of the pool and my neck creased back and just slightly pinched on the spinal cord, which swelled up and starved all the oxygen off to the rest of my body. Yeah, just being a fair-skinned Aboriginal, it was hard, especially when people wouldn't recognise that you're Koori. But I've always said it, you don't have to be black to be black. Being of my complexion and, you know, what I look like I've never not thought of myself being not Aboriginal. Like, I've always felt like I've fit in. That's a good thing. I always felt that, you know, I belong.
I'm going to talk about Jake Briggs, who refused to accept the disadvantaged label that has been placed upon seemingly the whole of First Australians and also people with disabilities. Most Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders leaders dreamt of being treated as full citizens of this country with full access to education. Here we are now. But if we allow Indigenous people to think they can't do anything or the system is against us, what is the point of learning? No ifs or buts. Every Indigenous child needs to attend school. One day, I dream of many Aboriginal doctors, accountants and public servants. Now we live in a world full of possibilities. And Jake shows this to us, of people who are victorious and refuse to accept the disadvantaged label. I'm pleased to say that there's many examples of Indigenous leaders who are victorious. They do not accept the left's intellectual racism and the disadvantaged label. They are the Aussie battlers working hard in the community to lift their people, create hope, and to let them believe that anything is possible. They have a humbleness and a real sense and connection to their country and to their land. And this is where they draw their strength from as being proud Aboriginal Australians.
Thank you to Warramai woman Josie Cashman, who is the Managing Director, Riverview Global Partners, and a member of the Prime Minister's Indigenous Advisory Council. Murray Burn survivor Jandamara O'Shane's portrait is called Tattoo, and Jandamara says,
"Yeah, as I was getting a drink, he just came in and poured petrol over me and lit me up. I was 6 years old when it happened. My feelings towards him are, well, I do forgive him, you know, because what I've been through made me who I am today. Because I'm just Aboriginal myself, we're all the kind of people that, you know, like to stick together and no matter what happens."
Jandamara is a Murri Indigenous Australian who at age 6 was the victim of a fire attack whilst playing at a schoolyard in Cairns, Queensland, on the 10th of October 1996. His given name comes from the Aboriginal resistance fighter, Jandamara. The perpetrator, Paul Wade Streeton, arrived at the school carrying a 5-litre can of petrol and never revealed why he chose to attack O'Shane. Out of the group of children in the playground, Streeton drenched Jandamara in fuel and set him alight with a cigarette lighter. With burns to 70% of his body, O'Shane was not expected to live. He required long periods recovering at the Royal Children's Hospital in Brisbane and years of skin grafts. Streeton was arrested and later convicted for the attack. He was sentenced to life in jail. Jandamara has forgiven his attacker, and life has brought him additional joy through the birth of his young son.
Thank you to Samantha Harris, who is an internationally renowned model and ambassador for the National Centre of Indigenous Excellence in Sydney. Joanna Aguas is an Narungga woman and the Deaf Arts Officer at Accessible Arts. Her portrait is called Sound of Silence, and Jo says,
"Didn't accept the fact that I was deaf because I wanted to be like a hearing person, something fitting with their world. I didn't know where I should be fit. Mum never told me about my nationality until I was 14, and I asked her, "Why didn't you tell me this before?" She said, "Because you're deaf and you wouldn't be able to understand." But then when I met my dad when I was at age 21, he said, "Jo, you should be proud. you're an Aboriginal woman and you're deaf, and that's for who you are. Shouldn't change. Even now, my dream, and I have a vision to help young deaf Aboriginal kids to achieve in life.
Joanna's mother contracted rubella while she was in vitro, resulting in her being born profoundly deaf. She was encouraged by her mother to learn to speak, as her mother was unable to accept Joanna's disability. From uttering her first word, water, at the age of 4, she fought for acceptance. Because her speech was imperfect, bullying at school discouraged her to participate in a world in which she felt she did not fit in, no matter how hard she tried. Joanna decided that every time a person would ask, she would tell them she was from Spain or that she was a Maori, so that she could be accepted. Then at the age of 21, she met her father for the first time. Joanna's vision is to empower other young deaf Aboriginal people to be inspired by her father's words and achieve acceptance on their terms rather than the conditions of others. Joanna's career aspiration is to assist deaf and hearing impaired Aboriginal people in Australia through education, Aboriginal and deaf identity, social development skills, communication skills and health, delivering this in Auslan as well as Indigenous native signs. Her goal for the future is to set up a centre that caters for both deaf and Aboriginal people, tending to all their various needs, including language, cultural issues, health and healing. Joanna is the winner of the 2011 Vocational Student of the Year at TAFE Western.
Leah Purcell is a Goa Gangari Waka Waka Murri woman and beloved actor, writer and director of stage and screen. John Baxter is a Lacha Lacha and Naranga man and board member of Reconciliation Victoria. He is also a board member of the First Peoples Disability Network. His portrait is called Standing Tall, and John says,
being an Aboriginal, I think, gives it a great deal of pride and a sense of purpose as well. And so a lot of the work I do is going out into the community and talking with people, whether it be school groups or senior citizens, making those connections in the first place and saying, well, yes, you know, there are a lot of good, strong Aboriginal people around. They've got their head in the right place and they can not only have a good in-depth understanding of the past, but also looking forward into the future as well, to seeing, well, there are brighter tomorrows. And as a collective group, that we can, you know, change the attitude of people to our kids, grandchildren, our nephews and nieces, to give them a better opportunity at life than we had, I suppose. So that's important.
John Baxter was born in 1960 in the tidy town of Robinvale in Victoria's northwest. Being born with the disability spinal bifida paraplegia, he was brought down to the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. However, being born Aboriginal, John was not returned to his birth family, but was fostered out to a non-Aboriginal family in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. It was not until his late teens that John finally got to meet his brothers and sisters and his father. Through his teens, John had a growing awareness of his Aboriginality and sought to reconnect with his mob. That first meeting with Aboriginal family and his growing independence and freedom of mobility changed the focus of his life. Uncle John Baxter is a proud Lachi Lachi Naranga man who throughout his life has sought to gain a deeper understanding of his culture and what it means to be Aboriginal. Furthermore, he actively helps others in the community, bringing awareness, encouragement and reconciliation to so many around him. One of the things that concerns John is the complex situation of how best to empower the First Peoples of Australia and their communities towards genuine self-determination. History records that external policies, which have often been enforced with a heavy hand, have had a profound and devastating effect. The past has sadly left the First Peoples generationally disadvantaged, struggling under government control through income management, welfare dependency, as well as all the disadvantage of limited life skills, education and employment opportunities. The over-representation of the First Peoples in the justice system and child protective services, and the despair reflected in the youth suicide crisis, are reflections of how much pain remains to be healed. Will proposed changes to the Constitution via a referendum help address these issues and remove the stain of discrimination and racism? Or will a treaty guaranteeing sovereignty and self-determination be a more effective path towards a more prosperous future for people so long oppressed? The voices of the First Peoples have the right to decide.
Thank you to Dr. Jeff McMullen AM. Jeff is a renowned journalist, filmmaker and writer. Artist Josh Lennox is from the Kalkadoon mob. His portrait is called The Wild Man, and Josh says,
I have to play and I have to be Aboriginal person. But the moment feel happy. I can enjoy.
Josh Lennox is a proud Kalkadoon man who at the age of 2, as a result of a car accident, acquired a severe brain injury that left him with cerebral palsy type impairments. In November 2010, he joined the Nanjumadi Art Group, which enabled him to connect with other Indigenous people with disabilities. He has been mentored by an uncle who has taught him how to use the freedom of expression within art to communicate. Each colour represents an emotion. Purple and pink is a wild man in him. Green is growth, black and brown for pride in his heritage. Blue is calming, yellow is joy, orange is life. He is very happy that Ita Buttrose purchased one of his paintings. Paul Calcott is the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders Cultural Resource Manager of the Sun Care Community Services, Nanjumadi Indigenous Art Group for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people living with disabilities. This has enabled Josh to engage with other people with disabilities and share their stories.
Art is soul. We are living souls, and as a creation of a God that has given us the ability to be creative, art enables me as an artist to have expression of freedom. There's no disability whatsoever, whether it's physical, emotional, intellectual, that can stop us to paint how we feel. And when we feel the urge to paint with colours that dance, colours that talk, and colours that connect to our emotions, then that's what a true artist is all about. Having a disability is an ability to paint whatever we want. And as an artist, we have the right, we have a gift of expression, and there's no disability in that gift. It is purely what it is, an expression of love, an expression of joy, and colours give us that connection. Colours in art, especially in contemporary Aboriginal art and traditional, are from the land. Ochre is our foundation. And to connect with ochre, to connect to the country, is the songlines. The songlines are stories of our creator, of how we become to be.
Thank you to Durrumbul woman Bibi Barber. Bibi is an artist and inventor. June Oscar is the CEO of Maninwarn Tikura, a women's resource centre. Her portrait is called The Matriarch, and June says,
I am the grandmother of Hudson. It was not right that our little children were growing up in this environment who are living their lives with unique and complex needs as a result of alcohol exposure in utero. So in 2007, the women got together and made a strong and final decision that we would apply for alcohol restrictions in our community. We want our people to know that this is their community, that this community cares about them, and that we are prepared to make hard decisions and stand up.
June Oscar, of Punaba descent, was born in 1962 at Fitzroy Crossing, Western Australia. She was sent to Perth for her secondary education at the John Forrest Senior High School. She left school at age 16. After returning to Fitzroy Crossing, June worked for the State Community Welfare and Health Departments. She later became a Women's Resource Officer with the Juna Jara community. She chaired the Murra Warra Warra Resource Agency until 1991, when she was appointed to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission for a 2-year term as a Commissioner. June Oscar was awarded an Officer of the Order of Australia in recognition of her dedication to resolving complex issues including fetal alcohol spectrum disorder in her community. She lives in Fitzroy Crossing in the far north of West Australia and is one of 3 grandmothers of young Hudson, who has FASD. June Oscar is the CEO of Murrunwanti Kura Fitzroy Women's Resource Centre. It is a centre of inspiration that provides women and their families a place for positive change and leadership. The centre provides support to Fitzroy Valley women and their families by encouraging safety and well-being and fostering leadership and financial independence. Self-evident truths are authentic, and we know them when we hear them. These truths are not necessarily abstract, but instead they relate directly to human experience. Sometimes, in fact all too often, these truths fall from our sight and give way to complex and technical policy jargon, parliamentary discussions, and pieces of legislation that sit some distance from the living, breathing, proud, and sometimes fragile peoples they will affect. In spite of this, truths are stubborn and are not easily deferred. The truth is persistent, and we must return to the self-evident truths that exist in our relationships and from our history, and we must learn from them and respond accordingly. Only by doing this will we achieve social justice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and in doing so, equality for all Australians. Remember, from self-respect comes dignity, from dignity comes hope, and from hope comes resilience.
Thank you to Dr. Tom Karma AO from the Kankarakan Iwalja tribal group. Tom is the co-chair of Reconciliation Australia and a chair of the Commonwealth Government's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Suicide Prevention Advisory Group. Kay Sadler is a Worimi Biripi woman. She is a board member of the First Peoples Disability Network Australia. Her portrait is called Freshwater, Saltwater, and Kay says,
But Aboriginal communities, they have this thing too, that's been talked about on TV about who's black and who's blacker, who's whiter than that. Oh, I can get a taxi, you can't. Oh, come on, stop it. That's just like kids working out. You've got 3 bits of candy and I've only got 2. Stop it. It's about what you do with your life. If you identify as Aboriginal, that's it. Why do you have to go and debate it? Why do you have a debate? Where does it get them? You get somebody opposing you, you have a debate, then you get in an argument, and you're back to square one. It doesn't stop anything. I don't know.
Kay Sadler was unaware that she was Aboriginal until her early 20s, making her emotional journey to connect to culture equally as painful as her physical pain from Marfan syndrome. This disability causes limbs to grow longer, but spinal disintegration also occurs. She lives in 2 cultures in a place where the salt water and the fresh water meet. In this water, she's found solace and relief in these peaceful waters from an internal and external pain. Kay Sadler is a board member of the First Peoples Disability Network and the Aboriginal Disability Network New South Wales. She is a member of the Biripi Land Council and is completing her Diploma of Business in Governance at Tranby College. The definition of an Aboriginal person under federal laws such as the Aboriginal Land Rights Act 1983 is a person who is of Aboriginal descent, identifies as an Aboriginal person, and is accepted by the Aboriginal community in which they live. All of these things must apply. A person's physical appearance or the way they live are not requirements. Because of such definitions, government departments now require Aboriginal people to provide proof of Aboriginality to be eligible for financial assistance, or in other situations such as public housing, education or employment. Aboriginal people can apply to their Aboriginal Land Council or an Aboriginal community organisation for a confirmation of Aboriginality or a certificate of Aboriginality. These documents state that the person is known to identify as an Aboriginal person and is accepted by that community as an Aboriginal person. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Act also applies to people who identify as Torres Strait Islanders. These services and programs are intended to address the social, health and educational issues that Indigenous people often face as the result of past removal policies and inadequate educational, employment and health services. Requesting proof of someone's Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander heritage helps to make sure that this intention is honoured.
Thank you to Shelley Rees, AO, who's from the Durable people. She is the chair of the National Centre for Indigenous Excellence and the Managing Director of Arilla. Kevin Coombs, OAM, is a Watchabaluk elder. His portrait is called Honorary Poem. Kevin says,
how many Paralympics I've been to? I played in 5. My passport was, back in 1960, was an honorary English passport. They could tell you how many sheep, they could tell you how many cattle, but they couldn't tell you how many Aboriginal people were, because we weren't voted. We didn't get our rights till 1967, and that's a fact, yeah.
Kevin belongs to the Watchabaluk people of Victoria. Also because of his representation for Australia in the Paralympics and general demeanour, he's accepted in the Basketball Hall of Fame. And I think this is a great honour for not only Kevin but for our Aboriginal people as well, and I think that's well deserved. All states had different laws in regard to Aboriginal rights. Most states had what we call an exemption, that Aboriginal people had to apply to be accepted in the white community. The laws of Australia said that Aborigines should be treated differently, and Kevin has been fighting for Aboriginal rights, particularly through his sporting abilities and his quiet assessment and fight for Aboriginal people to be part of the mainstream of Australian society.
Thank you to John Moriarty, AM. John is from the Yanoa people and is the chairman and co-founder Jumbunna Group. Leslie Flanders is a Gumbaynyaa woman and foster mum. The portrait of her and Penny is called A Penny for Your Thoughts, and Leslie says,
I've been a foster parent for 28 and a bit years, and I'm just taking care of my ex-sister-in-law's 3 daughters. So Penny is cerebral palsy. I looked at every aspect of what I can do for them before I took them. So within my tribe, I am their mother because I'm of the same generation as their mother, and that means the world to me. So just teaching them to be strong black women is my goal in life, to be a successful parent. I've always thought people look at the disability rather than the ability, and I want to totally explore and help Penny with her abilities so she can live a full life and never be looked at as a disabled person. I went into fostering because my dad's elder sister was of the stolen generation and we never could find her. So I promised myself I'd never have another child in the stolen generation.
Aboriginal children make up 45% of all children in foster care. The Department for Children Protection and Family Support tries wherever possible to place Aboriginal children within their families and local communities, ensuring to safeguard their cultural identities. Some children will need care for just a few days, some for a few weeks, and others for years. No one really knows how long a child will need care for. The type of fostering also depends on the age of the child and if they have behavioural difficulties or a disability. Foster children generally keep in touch with their birth parents and family members.
Auntie Leslie told me that birth children come from your belly, but foster children come from your heart. Auntie Leslie has fostered over 40 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children.
I remember spending time with Auntie Leslie and the girls. I saw how much love and care and attention that she gives each one of them. She has allowed the girls to blossom into strong, young, beautiful women. Auntie Leslie is undoubtedly the girls' tribal mum.
Thank you to Dita and Liam Neeram from Neeram Brothers Productions. These young men filmed the interviews that accompany the portraits. Lester Bostock AM is a Bundjalung elder. His portrait is called The Statesman, and Lester says,
I got into film making and video making, and I was one of the founders of Metro Screen, and way back in about 30, 40 years ago, and there was nothing around at that time for Aboriginal people to be involved in the arts. I was able to set up the Aboriginal Disability Network. I got the SBS Aboriginal radio program up and running, the Aboriginal Radio Network, and SBS's Aboriginal unit. Well, I set that one up. I've done so many things, and my whole life it's been reacting to needs. Yeah, that was what it was all about, helping other people and creating change.
Lester Bostock is a Bundjalung man with disability who has been at the forefront of promoting and protecting the human rights of Aboriginal people with disability in Australia over several decades. Lester publicly introduced the concept of double disadvantage and how it relates to Aboriginal people with disability as long ago as 1991, when the Mayor's oration he raised the issue in a paper entitled Access and Equity for People with a Double Disadvantage. As well as the leadership Lester has shown in consolidating the further development of the Aboriginal Disability Network New South Wales, in 2003 Uncle Lester was awarded with life membership to People with Disability Australia, a leading non-government disability rights and advocacy organisation. In addition to his disability advocacy work, Uncle Lester is widely recognised with a member of the Order of Australia as one of the pioneers of Aboriginal media in Australia. In recognition of this, a scholarship for Aboriginal filmmakers has been named in his honour. Aboriginal filmmakers Wayne Blair and Warwick Thornton were both mentored by Lester. He has received numerous other awards for community service over the years, including a Centenary Medal and the New South Wales Law and Justice Foundation Award for Aboriginal Justice. And he is the 2010 NAIDOC Elder of the Year.
Thank you to Wayne Blair, Bachelor Mananjali Waka Waka Man, who is an acclaimed actor, writer and director. Koori woman Lepreen Clark is an actor and artist. Her portrait is called The Kooyung, and Lepreen says,
I am Koori inside my blood, in my body. I am so proud because I'm living in town. It was called Spirit Land. It was called Culture, Freedom, Kindly, Passionate. It was called Spirit Land. I done really, really well with my family. I done really, really well my relationship against Koori people.
Lepreen Clark, who has Down syndrome and is the daughter of the First Peoples Disability Network Australia Deputy Chair and the granddaughter of Aboriginal boxer Banjo Clark. The story of Kooyung is an important cultural part of their lives, handed down for thousands of years. Lepreen knows the story of her country, and Lepreen knows the story of the struggle to hold on to the ownership and control of that country. Inherited legacy. Who are you obligated to? Why are we here? To embody our ancestors. Is this not yet clear? How do we define another? Lives intertwined. We walk in giant shadows on our motherland, now and forever, you and I.
Thank you to Wiradjuri Gamilaroi woman Lorna Munro. Lorna is a multidisciplinary artist. Marie Kalkiorta is from the Apalachee clan on the Wicklands. Her portrait is called Mother, and Marie says,
I've got my daughter
who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy since birth, and my boy is 13 years old. He just returned back from the boarding school because he was too homesick. He was elected to go to Brisbane Boys College. He said to me, "Mom, don't you leave me here. I gotta go back home." So if there was someone here to look after my girl for me, I would have stayed behind for my son to get a better education and to also understand what it's like outside of here. There's a big world out there.
Marie Kalkiota lives in the remote community of Arakoon in Cape York Peninsula, far north Queensland. She has a son and 3 daughters, the eldest of whom, Lynette, was born with cerebral palsy. I had the good fortune of being welcomed into Marie's family in Arakoon in the 1980s. She has a strong Wik woman blood pulsing through her veins. Her mother and her older sister were song women and keepers and teachers of culture. Marie learnt well from them and is renowned in her community for practicing her culture and passing on the stories and skills. Her journey through life has not been easy. She lost her mother and sister soon after the birth of her disabled baby, and she was herself still a young teenager. Marie has given her life to caring for Lynette in this remote community where few conveniences exist. Linny has never been to school, nor has she had access to regular physiotherapy sessions, which would have improved her outcomes and her quality of life. Marie has little respite to enable her to focus on the needs of her younger children. Her life's experiences have forced her to call on that strong Wik woman bloodline. Etched in my mind is the sight of Marie pushing Linny, now a fully grown adult, in a wheelchair in the heavy red gravelly dirt in 35-degree heat. Strength, culture, and the love of a mother prevail, even in the face of such adversity.
Thank you to Elizabeth Cowie. Elizabeth is a transition support teacher with the Department of Education, Training and Employment. Yamatji-man Marlon Noble's portrait is called Noble Cause, and Marlon says,
I'm from Jordan. I went to prison the rest of my life. Been there. Been done 10 years of my life.
It was alleged, and he was charged with the sexual abuse of 2 girls. And because he had an intellectual disability, he was found unfit to plead, and therefore the charges were never ever put before a court or assessed. In the last few years, I got him reassessed by a forensic psychologist, and that forensic psychologist found out, said he was fit to plead. The Department of Public Prosecutions refused to bring the charges again and re-indict him because the girls were saying quite clearly that nothing ever happened. He has not been able to have his day in court.
No, I'm not free. I out of prison, but I'm not free yet.
As Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner, along with Graham Miners, the Disability Discrimination Commissioner, we welcomed Marlon Noble's release after 10 years behind bars without a trial. There is still a need for the criminal justice system and mental health system to be more flexible in the way it deals with people with disabilities. And we have also called for the removal of the onerous conditions placed on Marlon's release. Despite being found unfit to stand trial in 2003 and never actually being convicted of anything, Marlon has remained in prison after being accused of sexually assaulting 2 girls in Western Australia in 2001. Even though Marlon was never convicted, the conditions attached to his release treat him like a convicted criminal. Marlon needs to be given an opportunity to clear his name, and he needs to be able to return to the life he was robbed of over 10 years ago. The conditions attached to his release read like a lifetime punishment, but it is for someone who has never been found guilty of anything. For example, he is not allowed to stay anywhere other than his home place without permission of the West Australian Mentally Impaired Accused Review Board, something which could prevent him from travelling to visit the grave of his mother, who was murdered while he was in jail, unless he has that board's permission. The law needs to be reformed so what happened to Marlon never happens to anyone ever again.
Thank you to Mick Gooder, who is the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission. Mick is from the Gangaloo people. Nora and Mavis are artists from Yuendamu. Mavis's portrait is called The Purple House. Her friend Nora Nelson, who has since passed away, says, with permission,
came here on year 2000 when I was really sick. I was in the hospital, diabetic and kidney problem. 8 months in the hospital. I didn't know that I was really sick. Then I went to renal and I'm all right here. And I come to Purple House. I come here, sit down and talk about my kidney, that I'm feeling sick and sometimes good. I'm happy with kidney. I'm happy. I'm all right, saying like that. I done a painting in Darwin Courthouse. It's on the floor where everyone sees it.
End-stage renal disease is endemic in remote parts of Australia. For many people, they must choose to leave their families and country and dislocate to regional centres to receive treatment or die prematurely. Dialysis treatment is a commitment of 3 days each week for the rest of your life. Sitting in a clinic while a machine cleans your blood. Life is about loss and waiting. In 2000, a group of Pintupi people from the Western Desert of the Northern Territory collaborated on paintings to raise money to change this bleak future for their family members. They raised over $1 million Australian and started their own health service to get dialysis out bush, in their community, and to be able to honour their cultural priorities. Western Desert, Nanampa, Walicha, Palianchaku, Chutaku Aboriginal Corporation was born. At the time, my father, Charles Perkins, who was a patron of the Western Desert Dialysis Appeal, led by the Papunyatula artists, said, "It's not only about saving lives, it's about saving a way of life." People have been getting home and having dialysis in their communities for 9 years now. But more and more people are needing dialysis, and it is hard for them to get support from governments to keep people at home on country. The dialysis patients and their families continue to raise money themselves and engage with the Australian community with their inspiring story of great determination, compassion and hope.
Thank you to Hetty Perkins, who is an Eastern Arrernte and Kalkadoon woman. Hetty is the resident curator at Bangarra Dance Theatre and the creative director of the festival Corroboree Sydney. Paddy Mundine has passed away. Her portrait is called Bayugal. Before she passed away, she said,
"Well, I'm from Bayugal, where the asbestos mine is. Weekends we used to be up in the mines, play with the asbestos, the dust and whatever. Problem I've got now is my lungs. I can't breathe. I've only got a quarter of a lung on the left-hand side. I'm on oxygen day and night, 24 hours. The thing is, because we're Aboriginals, I feel that we are left out of everything. Any doctors doesn't want to recognise it. I have these little cries every day, so it doesn't, I do it every day."
Bayugal was a small asbestos mine in north-east New South Wales, which was worked by the Bundjalung people of the area. Dust permeated workers' houses, and women and children were fully exposed. Tailings, mill residue, was spread around the community to settle the dust and provide material for roadworks. Children played in the tailings and on the mine site itself. Many members of the community, especially men, have died prematurely, but it has been difficult for people to win workers' compensation or compensation from James Hardie because of the generally poor health status of the community and the prevalence of chronic bronchitis and pleurisy, although cases of asbestosis and asbestos-related lung cancer have been clearly identified. Like Auntie Pat, my father, Roy Mundine, was from Bayugal. In fact, he is buried there with 6 of his brothers, most of whom died as a result of lung disease. He was one of the lucky ones, as he didn't work at the mine. He moved our family of 11 children down to Sydney when I was 7 years old. It is very easy to become overwhelmed by Indigenous health statistics, not only the data itself, but also the immensely complex interconnectedness of health problems, health risk factors and social issues. Indigenous people live these statistics every day, and we experience the real impact, not just as individuals and their specific health problems, but also our communities and families who are being hollowed out by things like low life expectancy, chronic and communicable diseases, and mental health issues, alcohol-related diseases and assaults, fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, suicide and child mortality. These problems have an ongoing social, cultural and psychological impact on communities and families. When it comes to Indigenous health policy and health services, the greatest challenge is bureaucracy, waste and red tape. Of course, for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it's not just about statistics. It's about our family, friends and communities. It's about our parents and our children and ourselves. To me, it is a very simple proposition. The success of government service delivery in Indigenous health should be measured by the outcomes achieved. It's about the outcomes and results achieved for Indigenous people.
Thank you to Warren Mundine. Warren is from the Bundjalung Gumbunya people and Managing Director Nyanga Black. He is also the chair of the Prime Minister's Indigenous Advisory Council. Noongar Rex Bellotti Jr.'s portrait is called TBA, to be advised. His father, Rex Bellotti, says on behalf of his son.
My son walked out the front of this property when the police saw him cross the road. Now, one of the eyewitnesses made the comment in the police report that the vehicle, when they spotted young Rex, that they swerved and made a beeline for him to run him over. After they've run him over, from eyewitness accounts, he was left on the road for something like 20 to 30 minutes before any medical aid was given to him. You can't say that the incident has not brought on any forms of disability. He's got a physical one, he's got a psychological and mental disability. Policing like this cannot continually happen. Somewhere there's got to be give and take, and the only give and take right now is our lives, our children, our people whose lives are expendable.
I am the great uncle of Rex Bellotti Jr. Nearly 5 years later, he and his family are still waiting for answers and compensation, for help with his ongoing medical care. The only thing holding his leg together is his kneecap. He needs reconstruction surgery, and if the doctors make one small mistake, he will wake up without a leg or without his life. When asked about the future, Rex Jr. said, "I have to wait. It's been more than 3 years and I haven't received the insurance and compensation. That's wrong, but I'll wait. Then I'll buy a house with the money. I don't know how long they're going to take, but hopefully not as much time as has passed since what they did to me." So there has been no compensation awarded, despite the fact that Rex Jr. is now permanently crippled. The police incident had denied this young man of a chance to make a professional football career or a normal job. All Rex Jr. and his family have been asking for is truth, justice and healing. Compensation will be central to both justice and healing for Rex Jr. and his family. As a Noongar man over 60 years of age, I know racism as it was always around me. As a child, I witnessed the blatant racism when my family were not allowed to have a haircut by a barber in the local town, or only allowed to sit in front seats of the movie theatre, or to be out of the town by 6 p.m. Today it is applied through the systems of government, and hard to challenge, and so racism is institutionalised. Two important places where systematic racism is practiced is in departments like law enforcement and health. The results are dramatic, where the avoidable deaths of Aboriginal people are unacceptable, would not be tolerated if it were non-Aboriginal people dying. In one resource-rich region, deaths of Aboriginal people are over 6 times the mainstream average for deaths. But it seems that no one in authority cares. The rates of imprisonment of Aboriginal people in Western Australia are testimony to the informal racist methodologies being employed in the policing and legislative systems. No matter which way you look at it, it's hard to justify how 3% of the population in Western Australia make up over 50% of the prisoner population for Aboriginal women, men and children. Again, it seems that no one cares. If one complains of racism, it is always overruled by the system, where the decision-making power is controlled by the descendants of colonisers. Whilst ignorance of Aboriginal worlds may be an excuse being bandied around by white services, the ongoing denial of the humanitarian support needed for Rex Jr. cannot be excused. You can make all the excuses in the world, but in the end the fact remains that Rex Jr. has not been given the medical and financial support that he needs to heal and build a decent life as a human being should.
Thank you to Noongar man Daryl Kickett, who is an ambassador for Red Dust Healers. He is also 2013 NAIDOC Person of the Year. Senior Warlpiri man Rex Japananka Granite's portrait is called Japananka, and Rex says,
Just because we're black, they look at us as one, and we don't see it. We got our own areas to abide by the laws. With us, we've been trained as, to speak the English. They can't talk our languages, Warlpiri or any other language that is there. We can speak fluently. They can't. We can speak fluent in our language and fluent in theirs. They don't understand the white world has just come like a big rock and rolled us over. And we're trying to say, no, don't you do roll us over, because we are who we are, and the trees and everything that are around us are connected to us.
Rex Japananga Granites is a senior Warlpiri man from the Western Desert and a custodian for the Minamina Dreaming and an ordained pastor. He speaks Warlpiri and English and has extensive experience interpreting and translating. His work as a mentor is in high demand as he seeks to resolve social conflicts which beset many communities. He's an award-winning artist and recently received an ANU scholarship to engage in postgraduate studies. This builds on his Bachelor of Education from Deakin University. He is working with the University of Sydney to document his interpretation of the connection between Indigenous law, country, and Christian faith. Rex's remarkable breadth of experience includes being a representative for ATSIC, several years as chairman for the Central Lands Council, and as a teaching chairperson for the World Council of Indigenous People. Rex is a strong advocate for access to country and access to bush food, which is part of the healing physically and spiritually for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. He's engaged in these activities in order to reduce the amount of illness and disability in his community.
Thank you to Professor Steve Bevers, chaplain at the University of New South Wales and great friend of Rex's. Rhys Nagus is a Wiradjuri man who is a health and wellness professional. His portrait is called The Lifesaver, and Rhys says,
I was raised to think and act white, which has been a hard thing to come up against and change in my life. I am a black man. I'm an Indigenous Australian. I'm an Aboriginal. I'm a native. I think with my head and my heart simultaneously, as we all do. We live and dream the land. Being raised to think and act white and be white, you might think, how did they do that? Well, I used to ask my mother's mother if I was Aboriginal, if I was dark, if I was black. She used to say, no, you've just got a suntan. My mother used to give me the same answer, but I didn't stop searching. Every opportunity I got, I spoke to people who might have even known my dad. and I found out who I was.
Assimilation as a concept is necessarily racist because it presupposes that the majority culture is inherently superior to the minority culture. It creates its own justification for the enforced imposition of the majority culture on the minority. Remember the old saying, assimilation equals genocide, because the logical end result of assimilation is that Aboriginal people with Aboriginal cultural values no longer exist. So unless we want a future Australia where there are no Aboriginal people, but rather people who are brown on the outside and white on the inside, and who talk, think and act like white people, then we need to debate, challenge and resist the dominance of assimilationist ideas and policies that abound in Australia today.
Thank you to Gumbanga man, Dr. Gary Foley. Gary is a senior lecturer in history at the Victoria University in Melbourne. Steve Witters is a man from the Kamilaroi and Anaiwan nations. He was the Armidale Demerit Council Aboriginal Liaison Officer for 38 years. His portrait is called The Visionary, and he says,
I was diagnosed by Fred Hollows, and he told me that I was had a form of macular degeneration, which meant that my eyesight would gradually be lost. It almost tore the family apart, in fact. I realised I had an obligation and a responsibility to my family. I decided it was up to me. When I say losing my sight gave me vision, gave me vision for the future. I saw everything in a different perspective, literally a different perspective. There's a lot of ignorance out there from other people who think because you've got a disability, you haven't got ability. Don't put that dis in front of my ability.
Steve Witters is from Kamilaroi and Anaiwan people of northern New South Wales. In 1990, Steve was declared medically blind by former Australian of the Year Professor Fred Hollows. Since being diagnosed, Steve has experienced severe depression and has turned personal adversity and challenge into a full and productive life. In addition to his full-time position with Armidale Council, Steve is an active citizen and regarded as a leader in his community. In addition to his local community involvement, Steve currently serves as a member of the New South Wales Disability Council and the National Aboriginal Islander Day of Observance Committee, known as NAIDOC. In 2011, Steve was one of 2 blind men to complete the 96-kilometre Kokoda Track in Papua New Guinea. In 2012, Steve rode a tandem bicycle from Brisbane to Sydney with fellow health advocate Dr. Mick Adams to raise awareness and funds to support men's health initiatives. As an Australia Day ambassador, Steve is keen to encourage his fellow Australians to embrace the freedom of choice, the high standard of living and the opportunities available to all Australians old and new. Fred Hollows took eye care to some of Australia's most remote Indigenous communities. He spoke out about the shameful state of Indigenous health compared to other Australians, and he helped establish Australia's first Aboriginal community-controlled medical service in Redfern in the early 1970s. Fred is no longer with us, but his work in remote Australia continues through the Fred Hollows Foundation, which was established to carry on Fred's legacy in 1993. Improving Indigenous eye care remains our priority, but the Foundation also works more broadly to close the gap in Indigenous health by working alongside community-controlled health services and our other partners.
Thank you to Jakey Adams-Barton. Jakey is the manager of the Fred Hollows Foundation's Indigenous Australia program. Tyrone lives in Darwin. His portrait is called The Carer. Tyrone says,
My name's Tyrone. My mum, I call her mum, but she used to be my auntie, but now she's my mum. I have to call her mum because my little sister will call her auntie, so I have to call her mum. I help her and I put nappies on Daniela, my little sister. I carry some shopping all at home for my mum, and it's really good and awesome. I really like it, and sometimes I tidy up the house by myself, no help, and it's really awesome. I really like my life.
Tyrone lives with his Aunt Liesl in the suburbs of Darwin. While Tyrone is Liesl's nephew, he has no worries in calling her mum. Liesl acquired a virus when she was a baby, which has affected her motor skills on a permanent basis. She also has a baby daughter who is 18 months old. The family are often faced with insufficient support and sometimes poor judgments within the community due to both race and disability. However, the love and support felt within the family home should be cherished and admired. Tyrone proudly calls himself the man of the house and helps his auntie, Mum, where he can, while she educates and supports the young ones under her care through their growth.
Thank you to Carla Grant, who is the host and executive producer of Living Black, which is aired on SBS and NITV. Hope Campbell's parents are from the Minieri community, Northern Territory and Northwest Tasmania. Hope's portrait is named after her, and she says,
I get teased a lot. I want to grow up to help other people because they might go through the same thing I had.
Raylene Wing and Dale Campbell are Hope's parents. Here are their words. Hope was diagnosed with otitis media, which has impacted her hearing and learning abilities. They said, we all need to look after our children. They are our future leaders. If they have undiagnosed hearing loss and learning difficulties, they won't be able to step up and take over as our future leaders.
Otitis media is a middle ear infection acquired through poor living conditions, resulting in fluid build-up behind the eardrum, causing the membrane to bulge and potentially burst. Australia's Aboriginal communities have been devastated by otitis media, causing hearing impairment that have impacted on learning abilities, creating lifelong disadvantage. Some studies suggest that up to 91% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in remote communities present with otitis media. Long-term otitis media can result in hearing impairment, an impact on the child's speech, language acquisition and learning, as well as behavioural problems affecting the child's social, physical, emotional and educational development. Severe otitis media can result in permanent hearing loss. Hope's parents work for an Aboriginal medical service in the Northern Territory, whose main purpose is to improve the health and well-being of people in the regions east of Katherine in the Northern Territory, using a holistic approach that includes high-standard medical care, the promotion of social justice and the overcoming of sickness that affects so many Aboriginal people in this region. This is done through health clinics and health education, mixing together traditional Aboriginal culture and the best mainstream medicine. Most importantly, the approach involves Aboriginal community people taking part in controlling their own health, Aboriginal health in Aboriginal hands. Everything from financial management and governance, staff selection and service delivery priorities are directed by an Aboriginal board and by Aboriginal community health committees.
Thank you to Gurrung Gurrung man Justin Mohammed. Justin is the chairperson, National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation and director of the Academy of Sport, Health and Education. Ian McKinley is Roseanne Fulton's legal guardian. An empty frame represents Roseanne and it is called The Forgotten. Ian says,
Roseanne, like many other Indigenous children in remote Central Australia, was born with fetal alcohol-related brain damage. She grew up beyond the effective reach of state and welfare services overlapping her homeland. Her behaviours, the result of years of neglect and abuse, inevitably brought her in contact with the criminal justice system. Found unfit to plead and unconvicted of any offence, she waits in prison until the time when proper disability care can be provided.
Kiga Yawuru and Murrin woman, Senator Nova Peris OM, made this passionate plea to Parliament for Rosie's release. Here is an excerpt.
I speak in support of the release of Roseanne Fulton from prison in Western Australia. She is in prison without conviction. Roseanne was found unfit to plead by a court. This is a result of mental impairment that Roseanne has had since birth as a result of fetal alcohol syndrome. Fetal alcohol syndrome can occur as a result of high levels of alcohol consumption during pregnancy. I've heard a lot of bureaucratic jargon in my life, but to describe someone in prison against their will without any conviction as currently in care is unbelievable. Prison is seen as the solution to health and social issues. They simply put all these issues into the too hard basket and then thrown in the basket into jail. Roseanne's advocates have certainly not forgotten her. Let's free Roseanne Fulton.
Gomeroi woman Dr. Jan Hamill is the coordinator, Collaboration for Alcohol-Related Developmental Disorders at the University of Queensland Centre for Clinical Research. Jan says,
Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is Australia's foremost human rights issue, albeit an invisible one. It weighs heavily on families, community, support services, the entire nation, and can be seen in increasing numbers of children and young people being placed in out-of-home care, students falling through the gaps in education, individuals suffering mental health problems, as well as people with disabilities being incarcerated in detention centres and jails. Incarceration of individuals with disabilities inflicted before birth only serves to continue the denial of their human rights across their life course. In Australia, we do not apply the same strict legislation to alcohol as is required by the tobacco industry. Even trying to raise awareness of the dangers of alcohol use during pregnancy meets brick walls. Still, the alcohol manufacturers do not have to bear the responsibility for causing lifelong brain-based damage. That damage has eclipsed the notorious drug thalidomide. In Australia, the rights of the child is secondary only to adult politics. It has to stop.
Epilogue. Dr. John Alexander Gilroy, Bachelor of Arts, Honours and PhD. John says,
It gives me great pleasure to congratulate Belinda and the members of the First Peoples Disability Network on the publishing of Unfinished Business. We, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, have endured over 2 centuries of British colonisation of our traditional ancestral lands. Colonisation is one of the main causes of the current high prevalence and incidence of disabilities and chronic health conditions in the populations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Nevertheless, we Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples continue to be amongst the oldest living cultural groups in the world. When I was a young photography student back in 1999, my teacher described the objective of the photographer as opening the eyes of the audience to a life story. Far too often, photography has been used to reinforce the oppressive, ableist culture of Australia. Typically, photographers, particularly in the mass media, focus their eye on the perceived disability of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. For example, the old Aboriginal man in the wheelchair, or the young girl with hearing aids being the architectural symbol of impairment and disability in Australia. As such, disability is a story. I first heard about Belinda Mason during a lunch with Dr. Tom Shakespeare in the late summer of 2011, when he was a visiting honorary scholar for the University of Sydney. I remember Tom describing Belinda as a prominent advocate for human rights for people with disability, using photography as her chosen medium. As a young amateur photographer myself, I was keen to meet her to learn about her work. I'll never forget our first meeting. We met in the Aboriginal Education Centre of the University of Sydney, Faculty of Health Sciences, with some of my colleagues. It was here I realised what Tom meant when he described her work as amazing. What took my breath away was how these photos represented the person beyond their perceived disability or handicap. Belinda has her photography eye on the actual individual's personality and lived experiences. Each person's story is a centrepiece of each photo. The person's disability is not the centrepiece. Each photo cannot be described as art or a picture. Each photo is an autobiography of the person. As an academic in the Aboriginal disability rights movement, I immediately saw how Belinda's talent can be used to empower Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disability in Australia. After discussing this idea with Damien Griffiths, the First Peoples Disability Network agreed to work with Belinda to create a photography book as a means to voice the experiences of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disability. Fueled by the spirit of the disability rights movement, Unfinished Business breaks the oppressive cycle of ableism in the photography industry. I describe Belinda's works as photography human rights advocacy. Unfinished Business has one objective: open the eyes of the world to the many life stories told by Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disability, their communities and families. This is the first published book where photography, as a medium, is used to capture and represent the lived experiences of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disability. Each photo is narrated by high prominent Australian figures to place each photo into its political and environmental context. Unfinished Business shows how our experience of disability is compounded by our experience as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Reading some of these stories takes me back to when I was a young boy living with profound speech impairment. I experienced discrimination as a special needs child and as an Aboriginal child. Despite this discrimination, like the many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who participated in the making of this book, I remain strong and proud of my identity and family heritage. In my many years as an Indigenous health and disability research academic, this book is a first of its kind for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the world. This book is a magnificent and valued contribution to the disability rights movement. It has been a real honour to work with Belinda and the members of First Peoples Disability Network in producing this book. I look forward to more adventures in the future. One photo, one person, one voice, a global audience of millions. With love, Johnny G.
Dr. John Gilroy is a Koori man from the Yuin Nation and is a sociologist in Indigenous health at the University of Sydney. John has worked in disability and ageing research and community development in government and non-government agencies for over 10 years. Having completed his PhD in 2013, John is now involved in a range of projects involving Aboriginal people with disabilities, their elders and communities. John is also the founding chairperson of the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Disability Research Network.